sermon is based on the icon that stands on the altar this evening, which is entitled Christ Accepts the Cross. The icon was written by Lynn Beard, and I've been using it this week for my meditation focus. And I just want to think about what that icon means and what it says to us. Where is he going? Where is Jesus going? You can see in his face that he walks with purpose, but also sadness. That there's a mixture there of both resignation, but also decision. But what we see in Jesus, especially on this day, is one who has come to the fulfillment of his work. And even though that involves a great deal of suffering and loss on his part, his mind will not be changed. As he says often, "For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth." Sometimes that testimony has words, sometimes more powerfully actions. This action. But where is he going? Where, soon after the next scene, we find Jesus as he accepts the cross. Think about that for a moment. Here's the bad news, sisters and brothers, in case you hadn't noticed, and I'm sure you have. That is that the inexorable, inevitable, unavoidable march of death continues on a daily basis. And the reality, as much as we'd like to deny it for ourselves and sometimes others, is that no one escapes. No one gets out alive. Have you checked the news today and recently? I was keeping track on my cell phone. I noticed that old stories, by which I mean an hour old, had disappeared for new ones. Our human tendency for mutual destruction. Just today. The headline, of course, how cute is this? Moab kills dozens. Now, we're not talking about the biblical kingdom of Moab. We're talking about the military ordnance air blast, which has come to be also known as the mother of all bombs. A 10-ton bomb dropped on ISIS forces in Afghanistan, and dozens are killed. When I looked at that article on my cell phone the second time, one of the programmers had made a mistake, so I believe, and rather than being listed under news, the article was listed under entertainment. I'm not making that up. If you want, you can watch the video of the bomb being dropped. Next to take the headlines was a British woman stabbed to death in Jerusalem as she was in Jerusalem for her pilgrimage to observe Holy Week. And then, of course, you'll remember the Coptic churches that were victims of bomb blasts on Palm Sunday when they could do the most damage. And perhaps you read the article about the man in Wisconsin who robbed a gun shop, sent a manifesto to President Trump, and then was intending to attack churches on Easter because he doesn't really like religion. Or maybe you read about the Congolese man who killed 2 UN inspectors, or the 3 South Sudanese workers bringing food to a starving population who were also killed, or the ambush of 8 Tanzanian police who were killed. This is all in the news within the past week and mostly today. And death continues its inexorable, inevitable, unavoidable march. And this is global. We're not even talking about in our personal lives at this moment. We're talking about what's going on in the world scene. And I haven't even mentioned North Korea, have I? And the threat that lies there as people point the finger and blame one another it's enough to scare you to death. Keep that thought in mind, as if you can ever get rid of it. There was that other terrorist attack that occurred almost 16 years ago that we all remember well. I still cannot get out of my head the disjointed image of people fleeing the World Trade Centers, except for the first responders who were going in. And as I heard about that, I wanted to say, you're going the wrong way. You need to run for your lives. But that's not what first responders do, of course. They give themselves for the protection of others, no matter what the cost. Probably not always knowing the cost. But they respond. They put themselves in harm's way to protect others. Recently, at a rather serious house fire here in Pleasantville, I was outside as the department chaplain, and I noticed that the attic was, as they say in firematic language, fully involved. That is, flames were shooting out windows and breaking through the roof. I also know that at least 3 of our firefighters were up on that very same level trying to douse the fire. Afterwards, I said to one of them, "Man, you guys scared me near to death. How did you manage up there?" And he said, "Well, it was a little dicey. At one point, we turned the water off to assess our progress, and as the flames came racing down the attic towards us, we just turned the water back on." I can't imagine. Always my reaction, you're going in the wrong direction. That's where he's going. Our first responder, Jesus, is going in the wrong direction, so it would seem, to the cross. And you'll remember that towards the beginning of our sermon tonight, I said that death is inevitable and no one escapes, except he could have, if he had chosen to. He could have gone a different direction. Matthew clearly tells us in his gospel that at one point when Jesus' followers decide to take up arms to defend him and themselves, he says to them, "Put away your swords. Don't you know that if I wanted to, I could have called 10,000 angels to come to my aid?" And yet, as first responder, Jesus decides, with sadness and resignation and deep, deep, unimaginable love, to go in the wrong direction, to take our lot upon himself. Jesus walked in. I want you to think about that as the significance of today. Jesus walked in. Not away, not around, but in. Into the midst of trouble, into the midst of our deepest need and deepest fear, Jesus walked in. A man dies in his hospital bed after a courageous battle against cancer. The family leaves grief-stricken, but Jesus walked in. A woman dies alone in her home, found by police after her friend tries to reach her. Alone, but Jesus walked in. A young man or woman in despair, hopeless, feeling like they have nothing to live for. They take their own life, and Jesus walked in. Trayvon Martin comes home from going to the store to pick up some snacks for himself, is encountered by a vigilante who, with no provocation whatsoever, kills the young man, and Jesus walks in. Time and time again, in our stories, both personal and communal, this is our refrain. In the midst of the worst circumstances imaginable, we detect it with the eyes of faith. Jesus walks in. Where death has the audacity to claim the last word and say, this is it, Jesus walks in and proclaims a different message of power and life at the cost of himself. This, my sisters and brothers, is the refrain of our faith today and every day as those who believe. Jesus walks in, and there is no situation that can keep him out. His presence can be ignored, denied, rejected, but his presence is there. Jesus walks in the midst of places like Syria and Egypt, in the midst of our own lives where we suffer grief and loss. Jesus walks in intentionally, with decision. Where is he going? He's responding, saving, loving. In the worst situation, into death itself, Jesus walks in to carry us home.